Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cyber Shorts, a LinkedIn Live series brought to you by Secureworks. During this session, we host short and snappy conversations around trending cybersecurity topics. And today I'm really excited. It's a first for our show where we have multiple speakers coming on so that we can really drive a conversation around what we're seeing in today's state of the threat. A few weeks ago, Secureworks published our annual State of the Threat report, and I'm really excited to get some commentary from some of our other security experts who have read the report and really knowledgeable on some of the topics and findings that we have today to share. And since we have so many guests, I'm actually going to ask each one of you to introduce yourself so we know who you are and a little bit about your background. My name's Stacy Leidwinger, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Secureworks, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. AK.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Stacy, and of course, Secureworks. My name is Dr. Iretioluwa Akerele. I'm a cybersecurity leader with over 10 years experience in this field. I'm also a cybersecurity coach and mentor. I currently own an organization registered in the UK called Cyberic Limited. And of course, one of my key strengths, something I'm passionate about, is supporting people to start a career in cybersecurity. Thank you very much for having me today.
All right, and I'm Scott Schober. Wonderful to be here. President CEO of Berkeley Varitronics, author, cyber expert. My company really focuses on advanced tools to combat cyber and wireless threats. And much of our customer base is, US DoD, Fortune 500 companies. And again, wonderful to be here with this great group.
Hi there, I'm Alex Rose, happy to be back with you all, and I'm part of the leadership team in our Counter Threat Unit here at Secureworks, and really happy to be here together with this whole group of people.
Well, great. Well, thank you all for joining, and I can't wait to dive into the topics because I know such a diverse background, but all focused on the same mission of how do we defeat the adversary. So with that, Alex, I thought maybe we could start with you and talk a little bit about what is the annual State of the Threat report from Secureworks and what were some of those key themes that came out this year?
Yeah, so I believe this is our 9th year putting out the annual State of the Threat report, and this is a really comprehensive overview of what we've seen over an entire year period. And so it is our opportunity to provide a snapshot to folks of really what's going on in and out of the entire landscape across those money-making criminals and the state-sponsored threat actors. And as we looked at this year's report and brought together our learnings over the year, a couple key things that we saw there were seeing law enforcement activity causing this fracturization in the ransomware groups, which makes things a bit unpredictable. This doesn't mean that the threat's gone away. It's still there, very much there, but we do see it presenting itself in different ways. We see the groups operating in ways that they may not have in the past, and we look forward to seeing how that impacts the threat landscape moving ahead. Another thing that we see is those ransomware dwell times remain low. So I think we'll probably touch on this more, but speed is still the name of the game. Getting into organizations really about getting in, making money, moving on so they can continue that type of activity. We've seen an increase in adversary in the middle attacks. And so I think this is a notable and concerning trend that we need to look at. And then, of course, a topic on everyone's mind is how do we see AI playing into this? So we've seen a slight growing in its use in a variety of formats for these criminals, which really, I think, expands the scale and credibility for these folks, especially with things like business email compromise, CEO fraud, and things of that nature.
Yeah, I love the highlights. I can't wait to maybe take each of those topics and let's break them down a little bit more. So the first one you talked about, Alex, is there was some significant law enforcement takedowns of some of the major ransomware groups like Lockbit, for example. But we did see then fragmentation come from some of those affiliate groups spinning out. Dr. AK, what are your thoughts for organizations as they think about this fragmentation and how it is changing the landscape? How should they think about it and how can they better prepare their cyber defenses?
Okay, that's a very good question. So the first thing I would say is that this fragmentation leads to the rise of other smaller groups that would also think about how they need to, approach these organizations in terms of attacks. So the rise of these smaller groups will lead to some aggressive level of attacks and we'll begin to see that in the coming months and years to come. So it means that organizations cannot rely solely on the defenses they have currently for known threats. So you have to begin to think outside of the box as an organization. There's a place for known threats. How about threats that are not known? What are the things that we need to do? Remember, the thing about cybersecurity is that the threat landscape is ever changing. The threats that you know 5-10 years ago is not what we are seeing today. For example, we are shifting our conversation to the rise of AI-driven attacks, and so on and so forth. So it means that with the rise of these groups, breaking and splitting, and the rise of smaller groups, organizations need to start thinking. We need to have a place for known threats. We need to have a place for unknown threats. What are the things that we are exploring currently around our cyber defenses? How can we continue to tighten it? What are the adaptive and flexible cybersecurity strategies that we need to start thinking about and bringing on board? Because the truth is that the threat landscape is changing. The way attackers are thinking, their mindset is changing, and these disruptions that we see will lead to more aggressive cybersecurity attacks in the coming weeks, months, or years. So organizations need to stay ready and, of course, prepare for it.
I just wanted to build on that because I think Dr. K makes some great points. When we see these ransomware groups kind of fragment, they really adopt different types of methods. And that's tough. It's challenging to predict which way that they're going to go, what they're going to implement. And in the past, maybe we relied a lot more on past behavior. And this kind of throws a new mix into the game, and it makes it a lot more challenging. So organizations, they really have to update their intelligence, and they have to be able to shift and pivot quickly to adapt their defenses to this. And that can really be challenging, I think. And when things are fragmented, now they're trying to track multiple smaller groups that are moving very fast and efficiently. And I think that makes it hard because they're fluid. It affects the landscape. And that means you really have to focus in on a layered approach to be effective to combat those things. So kind of just building upon what she's saying, it can be more challenging, but it's not hopeless, at least.
Yes, thanks, Dr. K and Scott. And I couldn't agree more. I think times if you're not deep in this world, like all of us are, you don't realize these major groups have entire affiliate programs. So they're using technology, they're using similar tradecraft. They even have kind of their own code of ethics. We might not agree to it, but they're working under it. So when you have fragmentation, you get these smaller groups and you're not quite sure how they're going to maneuver. So the best cyber defense is always getting ahead of it, understanding the best defenses, strengthening those core areas. And I love, Scott, that you called out really keeping that intelligence up to date so that you're working with whomever you're partnering with to make sure you have the latest and greatest, because those threats become known very fast. But there's a lot that we're observing and seeing those changes. So with that, I think, it would be unjust if we didn't talk about the fact, though, the law enforcement takedowns over this year were some of the largest we've ever seen. And it really has had success in taking down some of these larger groups. And those takedowns worked with private and public sector, working with governments across the globe. As we think about, Scott, you said we don't want to feel like we're in a hopeless situation. We really aren't. And I would say the greater community is really coming together. Maybe, Alex, you could talk a little bit about what you've seen and how private and public are coming together to build these cyber defenses and do everything we can to really keep organizations safe.
Yeah, I think this is obviously is a space that I care about a lot. I think it's a fun thing, but it's also been really exciting to see this robust collaboration between public and private just grow. Like, we're all learning, what does this mean? How can we collectively come together to best understand the threat? But then really watching global law enforcement efforts able to take action in a variety of formats. Sometimes that's disruption, sometimes that's full-scale takedown. And really, I think the exciting, important thing here is just the consistent and persistent action against these groups. And we saw that through the last year. I expect to see that in the year to come. I know I don't have much time here, but what I would also say is we had our annual Threat Intelligence Summit. If folks get a chance to watch the conversation between, we were lucky to be joined by leaders from FBI, from the UK National Crime Agency, and our own Don Smith, and they really focus in on this for quite a bit of time. And I think it provides a really good understanding of what's happened and the thought process behind it, why it's so important to be international. These groups are operating around the globe. I think that's an obvious one, but why is it really important to be partnering with the private sector as well?
Okay. Can I come in?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I just want to add to what she has said. One key thing to note with collaboration is that no single entity has everything it takes, to fight these attackers on their own. So with collaboration, it fosters the work and makes it easier. So because every entity is bringing in their own resource, they're bringing in their own knowledge, their reach. The cyber attackers, I mean, they don't really care about anyone. They don't care about any organization. They just want to bring down an organization. They want to steal. So it is very important that this collaboration is always in place. And I always like to say that when we come together, you find that what happens with this collaboration is that these organizations are bringing their expertise to play, they're bringing data to play, they're bringing information. And at the end of the day, you find that with this collaboration, you get things like access to timely threat intelligence, for example, because law enforcement is also involved. They have like the tactics, they understand some of the schemes of these attackers, and they're able to bring it into perspective. You also get coordinated response with collaboration. I mean, public sector, private sector, law enforcement, everyone is coming together. The response becomes more coordinated. Ransomware groups, as we can see today, and it's obvious to everyone, these guys are, I mean, they are sophisticated. Some of them can do more things than the cybersecurity professionals that you find out there. So it's not a battle of one organization or of one person. So I think this collaboration is very key, just like Alex has mentioned. So I just thought to touch on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Akay and Alex. And Dr. Akay, what you said, I really see, and it's something I love being part of this industry because it is this collaborative whole. Not one person, one organization is going to be able to defeat the adversary. It's all of us coming together. So maybe changing a little bit of topics as we dive into, so what is some of that tradecraft and how it's really getting into organizations? I think one of the things that I always find interesting every year is while lots change, some things stay the same. And what we've seen is that organizations are still not necessarily doing some of the fundamentals. Maybe not fully rolling out multi-factor authentication, patching things they need to, having extended detection and response capabilities put in-house. In fact, we saw in over 50% of the incidents where someone was broken or hacked into, they lack some of these basic controls. And so, Scott, I'm curious with your organization and the work that you're doing, do you see similar trends still happening out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really important point to touch on. There are gaps in these basic defenses, as you mentioned. MFA, there's still that reluctancy for people to adopt it fully throughout the organization. Patch management and XDR, the extended detection and response. And now I think it's important that we consider what are some of the reasons why these things persist. And most of the time, it's resource constraints or budget constraints. That's probably the number one reason, at least that I hear about in talking to organizations. And also there's costs when you think about many are tied with legacy systems. It's hard to migrate and say, okay, let's update things and do it right. That could be difficulties. And I think we're talking about the MFA and just the resistance. And I'm surprised, for years I've heard this when I present. People say, well, it's inconvenient for users. We need to get in there and get in there quick and get out and do our job. We can't focus or get distracted with MFA. And I understand that to some degree. We all want to be efficient. However, that the time and the management of it doesn't trump security. And I think that's where sometimes we have to back up and balance that and have the right perspective on it. And unfortunately, the final reason that I think we should consider is just there still is a shortage in cybersecurity experience, and the jobs are not all fulfilled in certain niche areas. So it's important for organizations really to carefully find where they need to put the right talent in and work closely with third parties there so they can do an effective job. And I think a lot of those different things come into play. And I think it's really important, some of these points you bring up.
Okay, can I step in?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I totally agree with Scott, and I'm not going to repeat what he has said because everything is 100% correct. I'm just going to add honorable mention to Secureworks. I mean, that report is really fantastic. And the data from the report actually emphasizes the importance for organizations to get these controls in place. I mean, we can't overemphasize this importance because a lot of cyber attacks that you see out there, where you come back to the real scenario, you find that lack of implementation of some of these controls has caused it. And Scott mentioned important points around resourcing. I think another point to mention is even resistance. I mean, users in some ways, they will say, this is too complex. I just want to log in and do my job and leave. But you are missing the important piece of this. What does it cost to just put that second level of authentication in place? That would save you, a lot of issues that could possibly happen. So, I mean, going back to the reports that Secureworks published, I think it's very important for organizations to begin to think about these controls, how it's going to improve their organization. Where the statistics are there. When you see a cyber attack and you go back to the root cause, you find that lack of some of these controls is the reason why these attacks have happened. So this is also to encourage every organization out there. I mean, if you are watching this, check, assess, do an assessment. What are the things that we need to have in place that we don't have currently? How can we continue to improve our posture? How can we continue to improve our process? What are the technologies, the resources? What organizations do we need to speak to? Organizations like Secureworks, for example, can help to put some of these controls in place. And I think it is actually very important.
Thank you both. I really like, Scott, you call out that a lot of this isn't malicious intent or on behalf of organizations. Everyone's under constraints, right? Little time, little resources, lots more to defend as cloud and other new attack surfaces come up. But I think, Dr. AK, what you really pointed out is it is still education and awareness as well. And so how do you make sure you prioritize the right things? And I even think making sure all teammates, all employees recognize they're part of this. But I can feel that. I once had a great friend and they said, Stacy, I wanted the best thing I could do. And I said, put multi-factor authentication on. And they're like, what's the second thing I could do? And I said, put multi-factor authentication on, right? And so I think some of this is just awareness on how important these things are, and that it's better to spend time on some of the fundamentals and basics than necessarily going after those things that might seem like a shiny prize, but are they the ones causing the threat? And that's a great lead into our next topic, because I don't think you can talk about the state of cybersecurity and what's going on with the threat without touching on two letters of AI. And it's not to sensationalize it, but it's a reality. It's out there and it's being used both by defenders and protectors, but as well as the adversaries. So I thought maybe start with you, Dr. AK. And what are your thoughts around how AI is changing the threat landscape?
Yeah, that's a very good question. To be honest, I like to talk about AI because there's a lot of changes that we can see. It's very obvious to see because of the introduction of AI. I'm sure that attackers are excited about the introduction of AI because, of course, it also helps to improve their process, which we don't like because, I mean, the more knowledge they have about it, the more things they can do with it, the bigger the problem for us as cybersecurity professionals. For example, you find that their phishing campaigns is now becoming more sophisticated. There are phishing tricks. Someone was telling me that if you see a phishing email, for example, begin to spot grammar errors. And I was trying to tell the person that we're at a time where phishing emails are coming clean. You will look at the email and you find that there is no single error there. Why? Because of AI. All they need to do is to put in whatever chat or whatever email they want to send out, put it into ChatGPT, for example, and they get the correct wording and they send that out. So you see that phishing campaigns are even becoming more sophisticated now because of AI. You find advanced malware techniques, things that you can't imagine, that you can't think about. Attackers are thinking about it. Social engineering is now being powered by AI. So we are moving from the state of, the normal way of doing attacks to AI-driven attacks. And the last one I'll quickly talk about is deepfake for attackers. I mean, I was reading about a deepfake attack that happened, I think still this year, where the only person who was real in the room was the finance manager. Every other person were fake. And he ended up approving a transaction of $25 million. And that was what that company lost. So you see that AI is shaping the way, this is shaping the style of cyber attacks. So what does that mean for us as cyber security professionals? We can't sleep. We can't go to sleep. The moment you blink your eye, these attackers are up. They are up and they are ready to drive the attack. So what does this mean for us? We need to also begin to think of new ways. We can't be stuck in the old ways of doing things because these guys are not stuck in the old way. So how are we using AI to improve our threat detection and response, for example? How are we using AI to do predictive analytics? What are the things we can put together? We are in the world and age of data. When you input some things into the system, you can already forecast that this is likely to happen. So how are we taking AI to our advantage for that? How are we using AI for incident response? We need to begin to think of how can we automate this process? How can we improve this process with the use of AI? And of course, lastly, enhancing our threat intelligence with AI. When you are seeing patterns, when you are seeing your data pointing into a direction, then you begin to think of what are the steps, what are the measures we need to take. And I think we can also use AI to our advantage. When we are teaching our employees, let them, don't shy away from AI. Don't say, no, we don't want them to know about this thing so that they don't exploit it. We need to talk about it when we are training our employees too, because one thing is certain, AI is here to stay. AI is not going anywhere. So we need to begin to embrace it. We need to use it to improve our processes and also think like the attacker so that we can think of ways to improve our organization. Thank you.
Maybe I could build on that because I concur with certainly the Dr. Ike. And maybe from a practical standpoint, I was dealing actually with this yesterday with my father. He called a little bit in a panic and he got a phone call, and it was a social engineering type of call where he said, hey, he's involved in some fraudulent activity, well over $1 million. They need to have access to his accounts to freeze them. And all the information that he was provided to the T was, I believe, generated from AI. Somebody actually got a nice script and they followed it, providing him case ID, phone numbers, everything to substantiate it. And I was concerned. And I took that information immediately. It said, hey, you didn't give out anything personal. No, I stopped and got suspicious and I called you right away. I said, good, thank you. So I called a colleague in law enforcement, a financials crimes group, and shared that with him. And it was interesting. And he said, well, the attackers are now so much more sophisticated. These cyber criminals are using AI. So that way, the flow of the conversation, any objectives you can overcome. So they've got a script right in front of them. It's written. The numbers are provided, all that information. So we as good guys have to use help. We need help from Secureworks. We need help from common sense. We need to really go through and vet every single individual. And kind of what we were talking about earlier, I like the point about the importance about sharing. And Alex was talking about this, private and public working together. And I think that's really powerful in combination with AI. Because again, the good guys are using AI, but so are the bad guys. But when we work private and public together, it's a big difference. We recently started working with InfraGard, and as a private company, sharing information, the threats and things that we see real world daily with law enforcement, in particular FBI, and they in turn can share other things back. Now you've got this nice relationship where two are stronger than one. And I think that's really important. And then you add in AI to that for the good, we can now start chipping away at these cyber criminals and really making a difference. Because what is AI great at? AI is great at really analyzing tons of data and putting it right in front of us in simple form so we can use it and build from that and do the analytics from that. And I think that's just so powerful that we could adopt it from the good side to make a difference. And I think it's exciting things ahead when we look at it from both what the criminal perspective, what they're going to be doing, but really as a defense perspective. I think we have to embrace AI and not be so afraid of it as many people are.
Yeah, I think I'll add just a couple things to the end of that, because all these points are great. But one of the things we often talk about and think about when we're thinking about it from the threat landscape perspective is we've got to keep our eyes on how the threat actors are thinking about using this, right? We're in the different forums and watching their conversations around it. But largely what we are seeing is it's not about changing the game, but the speed of the game. So that's good for us in some ways, right? Our detections that we've built for certain things still work. But when organizations are thinking about how do I respond to this? How do I prepare? Sometimes those risk conversations change because the speed has changed. Where we talked about in the past, dwell times for ransomware, for example, you might have had weeks, months to identify a threat actor operating within your system. That's not what's happening anymore. And so I think the speed and volume are the things that we really focus on as we see adoption of various, especially generative AI techniques, right? And tools. But we also keep our eye on those things like deep fakes. We see people using them, we know it will pick up. And so we just really have to keep our eye to the future and how we're able to adapt and respond as things progress forward.
Well, thank you all. I knew that was going to be a meaty topic, but I think all have really aligned on the fact that, AI just makes things, as you say, Alex, move faster. It's really an efficiency and effectiveness. And when we're both using it, whether it's the adversary front or the defender front, we know we can make differences. I know here at Secureworks, as we've gone ahead and implemented some machine learning and AI in our own solutions, we've been able to reduce our response time by 80%. So really working and helping move faster because we're able to look at that risk and we're able to make those really limited resources more effective. So with that, and I will say we only have about 4 minutes left, so I am going to ask you to keep it short for a very other meaty question, but it's going to force you to think about that one thing is we're heading into 2025. I can't believe that the year is starting to come to an end. So as we think about all the observations that we've talked about today and we've seen, what would be that one takeaway for anyone listening today on what should they be thinking about prioritizing in their cyber defense plans starting next year? Scott, why don't we start with you this time?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Secureworks findings does a great job in highlighting the basic defenses. They're really the first line of security. So if organizations tend to neglect them, it starts to create openings for cyber criminals to exploit. So organizations therefore need to build on their cyber hygiene and all the things that we were talking about. So important, the regular patching, MFA, protective detection and response. And when they do these things, and even though some of these are very basic, their organization will be resilient against attacks, especially ransomware, which is probably one of the biggest threats ongoing, and it'll make a difference.
I'll go ahead and go next. I think the biggest thing that I would think about is, well, I'd start with this is not an all or nothing game, right? Progress is what we're looking for. Progress is what helps us move forward. Organizations are all at different stages, and progress for you isn't the same as progress for someone else. And so that's really key. And I think as you think through progress, it's about being adaptive in your ability to be resilient as well. And so I think about that as solutions that are open and modular, understanding which dependencies that you have within your security stack, right? And building a strategy that allows you to pivot as quickly as possible. And so thinking into the year ahead, what does my program look like? What does progress look like for me? And how do I make progress in a way that is adaptable and able to evolve with the threat landscape and just the general technology changes that are happening?
Okay, so just to add to what everyone has said, for me, I would say build a cybersecurity culture in your organization. Always remember that every single person in the organization is important when it comes to cybersecurity. You can have the best of technologies, you can have the best of processes, but if you don't get it right with your people, you are still back to square one. So it is very important that you know everyone in your organization and you are able to keep them up to date when it comes to cybersecurity so that we don't have that one person who would fall short. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I love bringing those three together. What I've heard the recommendations for our listeners as they think about 2025 is get back to basics, make sure you're doing the fundamentals correctly, think about your own stage in your maturity process, and it's all about making progress. It's not about perfection. Every improvement is keeping you safer. And then Dr. AK rounding it out with building a security culture. There's nothing better. We're all in this together, and I think that's what we're really pointing it out. Well, again, thank you, Dr. AK, Scott, and Alex, for joining us today. A really engaged conversation. If you're interested in reading the State of the Threat report that we were talking about, please visit secureworks.com, and I bet we'll post a link here on LinkedIn as well. And if you ever do find yourself where you've engaged, you've been hacked into, you're executing an incident response activity, Secureworks is here to help. That's one of the things that we can do, not only on the back end, but also on the front end to help build those cyber defenses. Again, thanks for joining in today, and I look forward to the next conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.